Well, welcome to Praxis, a podcast where we explore how to...
A podcast.
Didn't even get the first sentence out. All right, cut.
Praxis Podcast.
Welcome to the Praxis Podcast.
Welcome to Praxis, a podcast where we explore how to practice and embody the way of Jesus in our everyday lives. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. We're in a series right now focused on cultivating a healthy church culture. Every church has a culture, whether they realize it or not. Some churches have healthy cultures that are reasonably healthy, while others do not. And of course, no church is perfect, but part of the work every church needs to engage in is to intentionally work to close whatever gap exists between being healthy and where they currently are. So in this series, that's what we're doing. We're seeking to close the gap. And this involves not only talking about the marks of an unhealthy church culture, but casting vision for how we as a church can embody a way of life together that, while it may not be perfect, is oriented towards goodness and kindness and love. So after several episodes of naming some of the major toxins in the American church soil, today we are going to shift gears and discuss the first nutrient that is essential for healthy church culture, which is empathy. I think we had a great discussion today, lots of things to walk away with, to develop and cultivate empathy, not only in our own personal lives, but also in our church communities. So let's get into it.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Mac.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Josiah.
So I just recently got back from a vacation with my family, and one of the highlights of our vacation, we went to Southern California and saw Joshua Tree and Death Valley. But I rented a Jeep Wrangler, which is my dream car. Like, at some point in my life, I really hope to own a Jeep Wrangler. We had the base level insurance package, and yet I continually took it off-roading, and I just had so much fun. But it made me wonder, what would be your dream car?
I'm not the right person to ask this question to. I literally could not think about anything I would care less about.
Really?
Yeah.
Like, you never have a moment where you're driving and you're like, oh, that would be a really fun car to drive at some point.
Nah. Don't think so.
All right.
Josiah?
Yeah, I like anything that's fancy on the inside. I don't necessarily care how it looks, but I want to feel really comfortable. Honestly, if I had a dream car, it probably would involve someone driving me.
A car that comes with...
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be okay. I'd be okay if I sat in the backseat of a nice vehicle and never had to drive again.
That's hilarious. Okay. Adam, what about you, dude?
I love how you say you don't really care, but really what you're describing is like a Rolls Royce.
Yeah. With a driver.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess I just don't have a specific preference of which one exactly.
You just want to be kind of like the Lincoln Lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
just watching that show, I get so envious.
Yeah,
just
you're like,
hopping in a car,
back.
drive me somewhere.
Funny. Adam, I mean, my question here bombed. Do you have a dream car? Yeah,
I don't know. I would love to experience a Tesla sometime. I think that'd be fun.
Okay. I was going to say, as Josiah was talking, Alex and I took a Tesla for a test drive, and it was really fun.
Okay.
You don't even have to press the brake pedal. Like, it's only one. I think there is a brake pedal, but
as you release the gas, it brakes.
Yep.
Yeah.
You like release the gas and it just automatically brakes. That's
in
cool.
more than Teslas though too. We had rented a Jeep Grand Cherokee when we went to New York, and it was similar with that one too.
Interesting.
I'll hop on the Tesla train, Adam.
Sure. Sounds good.
I just can't wait till they automate interstates. Like, I'd be okay if just like be able to sit back and take my hand off the wheel and take me wherever you're going to go.
If you're not going to have a driver, you want an autonomous vehicle? No, that's fair. All right. Well, speaking of self-driving cars, we are in a series right now.
We're driving this thing.
On cultivating a healthy church culture. And because this is part of a series, if you haven't had a chance to go back and listen to the previous episodes, you can go back and take a listen. But big picture, we're talking about church culture. We're saying that every church has a culture. And while some churches have a healthy culture, many do not. So borrowing from Scott McKnight and Laura Behringer, we've been using this metaphor of a fruit tree to help us out. A fruit tree has branches that bear fruit, a trunk that supports and feeds the branches, and then roots that suck up nutrients from the soil. And we've been saying that the most important thing is the soil. If the soil isn't healthy, the tree won't be healthy and it won't be able to produce healthy fruit. So over the last several episodes, we've discussed 4 toxins in the soil of the American church that are inhibiting kingdom fruit. And those are having a personality-driven church, or what we've called celebrityism, the belief that growth is the mark of success, or what we called growthism, the misuse and abuse of power, or authoritarianism, and then policing right beliefs and behaviors, or dogmatism. All 4 of these, we said, work against a church culture that is characterized by tov, or goodness. But now today we want to shift gears, having done the difficult work of taking an honest look at what's not going well in the church, or some of the things that are blocking kingdom fruit from growing. We now want to follow Scott and Laura's book and begin describing the key nutrients that we need to put in the soil in order to bear kingdom fruit. If toxins corrupt the soil and prevent fruit, what nutrients can we put into the soil to help grow fruit? So that's the idea.
I like your shifting gears reference based on the car talk.
Oh,
earlier.
yeah. Well,
That's
good point.
Nice
Yeah,
job.
that was intentional.
And we were at the CMA conference recently, like kind of the district conference, where all the churches in Wisconsin, the UP gather and whatnot. And my good friend Doug Jared listens to this podcast, and he was like, dude, this is the work. I mean, this is what Scripture, he just reminded me, he's like, this is what Scripture talks about in like Ephesians 4 and Colossians 3 about taking off the old self and putting on the new self, right? So that's kind of like even shifting, like this is work we see in the Scripture that we're being invited into, which is to like take the nutrients off, take the old off, put in the new, right?
Yeah. We like to use those scriptural, like put on the new self as a personal look into transformation, but maybe applying it broad scope to an entire community, that all of our communities need to be putting on the new self and taking off the old.
Which is actually how, not to go on a tangent here, but all of the letters were written to communities.
Yeah.
We're the ones who like apply it individualistically and kind of go, oh, he's talking about me personally taking off the old and putting on the new. Yes, of course, but he's talking to communities first and foremost, of which I'm individually a part.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about this. So how can we as a community, and if you're not a part of our church community here at Crosspoint, whatever community you are a part of, how can we do this work? Today we're going to continue that discussion by talking about the importance of empathy. So we want to submit that healthy churches, or churches with a tov culture, nurture empathy. They create a culture that's characterized by empathy. Yeah?
Yeah. I think before we go too much further, it's probably good for us to review how culture works and the power that it has to shape and influence us. A quote from the book that Katie we've been talking about, Church Called Tov. They said, as we live in our culture and also into our culture begins to live into us. A good culture will shape us towards goodness. A toxic culture will shape us towards evil. So culture has this shaping influence on people that can be positive or negative. And I think of Jesus in Matthew 17 when he's talking about good fruit. He says a good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good. So the proof of the proof of the soil is in the fruit that is produced within not only individuals but also a community. I want to add, if it's okay, to add one more analogy to this discussion. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but think of a goldfish in a fishbowl.
I once had a goldfish, and it lasted about 4 days.
Yes.
How old were you?
Oh, I was an adult.
Oh, that's funny. So in a goldfish in a fishbowl, if we are the goldfish, the water that we swim in is the culture. So one, we can't escape it. It is all around us, and there's no way for us to escape the culture we're in. If we leave one culture to go to a different church, it's just going to be another culture there. We're just moving from fishbowl to fishbowl. And number two, we're often unaware of its effects on us. So if the water is unhealthy, hence the dead fish, Mac, the water probably wasn't healthy.
It was not healthy. I toxified the water, and this was the result as an adult.
Yes. we're going to be negatively impacted. But if the water's healthy, positively impacted, our church culture is the same way. We're often unaware of how much the culture within our community is affecting us for better or for worse, and obviously, in turn, other people around us. So we've spent a lot of time over the last several episodes talking about just how destructive things can be when there are toxins in the soil that create toxicity in the culture. An unhealthy church is going to create an unhealthy community, and it'll shape people in unhealthy ways. But the opposite is also true, right? Just as dysfunctional patterns can create a toxic culture and malformed people, so also healthy patterns of behaving and relating can create a positive culture that forms people into the likeness of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So culture has power and can breed toxicity in unhealthy people, or it can breed health and form kingdom people who bear kingdom fruit.
Yeah, and I suppose if we don't want a bunch of dead fish floating around,
yes,
we're saying we need to intentionally nurture empathy in our communities. No, we talked, just a reminder, I mean, we talked about empathy during our EQ series when we were discussing social intelligence. So we kind of distinguished between two forms of empathy. We talked about cognitive empathy, which is the ability to understand what someone else is thinking or feeling. So cognitive empathy is really all about perspective taking. It's being able to take on and understand someone else's perspective or way of viewing things or how they're feeling about things. Emotional empathy is really the ability not just to understand, but actually to feel what someone else is feeling. So emotional empathy is all about being able to feel or put yourself in someone else's shoes. Now, in Church Called Tove, I'm glad they connected the dots between empathy and compassion, because to me, empathy by itself is not enough for what we're going to get at today. It's not enough to simply understand something from someone else's perspective or simply to feel what they're feeling. As Scott and Laura say, compassion is the outworking of empathy, right? So if empathy is about our ability to understand what someone else is thinking or feeling, to put ourselves in their shoes, to feel what they're feeling, well, compassion is all about actually entering into it, getting proximate to another person, right? So maybe we could say empathy is about awareness. Compassion is about action. Like it actually moves us to do something. They actually quote from a woman named Beverly Engel in their chapter. They say, the mark of empathy is to feel another's pain. The mark of compassion is having the desire to alleviate or reduce the suffering of another and do something about it. So for me, it's not enough just to be aware, but we must be willing to take action on behalf of someone else, you know? What would you guys say or add to that?
Yeah, it makes me think of the Brene Brown video that we've talked about before, where she talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy, just to add like another layer on it. Like sympathy is looking at someone who's down in a pit and like saying, oh, I feel so sorry for you. Like, I'm so sorry.
You want me to make you a sandwich?
Yeah.
Right.
I think that is what she says.
Yeah.
Empathy is like climbing down in the pit, like really getting on their level and seeing things the way that they see them and empathizing, for lack of a better term. And then what I hear you saying is compassion is like that next step of maybe getting them out of the pit.
Yeah, for me at least. And it sounds like you guys are trending in a similar direction. Like simply being aware isn't enough. We actually have to be willing to enter in. So it really is about embodying compassion. And I thought it'd be fun. I mean, we talk every week. This is about embodying the way of Jesus as a community. So, you know, I read something this week that said compassion was the most frequently mentioned emotion of Jesus in the Gospels. Repeatedly, the Gospel writers emphasize that Jesus is motivated and moved by compassion. So I just thought, man, why don't we create some space to reflect on that a bit? How would you guys say that we see Jesus embodying compassion, you know, in his life and teachings?
Well, it's a timely question because, as you guys know, we're doing a sermon series at Crosspoint right now on the Sermon on the Mount, but we're talking about why Jesus came. And what we're saying is that Jesus came to announce the kingdom of God. So the Sermon on the Mount is basically Jesus's like manifesto of what he was about and what the kingdom was about. And when we look at this and the other teachings, we get a picture of what the kingdom of God is. And I think it's clearly a kingdom that's rooted in empathy and compassion. So in Luke 4, Jesus gives what some call the Nazareth Manifesto, where he enters a synagogue in Nazareth and he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then he says, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." So he's essentially saying, remember these prophecies from hundreds of years ago that told you what the kingdom was going to be about? Well, that's here, and it's me. I'm demonstrating it. I'm embodying it. I'm proclaiming it. And here's what it is. Good news to the poor, release for the captives, sight for the blind, freedom for the oppressed. And then there are tons of examples of him actually doing these things. He didn't just talk about them. Like he healed people, freed people, dignified people, etc. So Jesus came to announce a kingdom of good news for the outcasts. And when you think about the way the world worked then and the way the world works now, it's completely upside down, right? Like the world elevates people to power and authority and status if they're able-bodied and successful and, strong and all these qualities that we think make for success. Jesus announced a kingdom that moved towards people on the margins with empathy and compassion in a way that dignified them. He gave worth to their lives. And if we are to be kingdom bearers to the world around us, then I think we are to do the same.
Yeah, I also like how you mentioned that this has its reference in the Old Testament. I mean, obviously there Jesus is quoting from the book of Isaiah, but it's just to say a lot of what Jesus was doing actually wasn't new. I mean, he was fulfilling something that had been spoken about for a long time. Throughout the scriptures, you see God's compassion towards all of humanity, but especially, I mean, over and over and over, you see the challenge to care for the poor and the oppressed, the foreigner and the widow. And when you read the prophets, they get particularly amped up when God's people fail to live into compassion towards those very groups of people. So there's this really throughout the scriptures, but supremely embodied in Jesus, you see the compassion of God on full display and what it looks like to be people who give witness to who God is. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and on an individual level, when Jesus interacted with people, he saw people through the lens of that empathy and compassion. So yes, you have like the overall purpose of God's kingdom moving forward into restoring things. And then when Jesus was here individually interacting with people, he often saw people through that lens when other people didn't. Right? Numerous times we see like what we were just saying, Jesus saw the crowds. He was filled with compassion. What does it mean to actually see someone? Like he observed and was moved with compassion, as scripture says, like he did something about it. So we see Jesus embodying the cognitive and emotional side of empathy quite often. Others on the outside saw, right? I think of when the children were coming to Jesus and the disciples saw like, oh, you're distracting him. He's got more important things. Jesus didn't see that, I just got this bigger purpose. He looked at the children and saw them through that lens of like, let them come to me.
Yeah.
And actually used them as an example for what other people could be more like in the kingdom. And then women as well, the poor, the sick, like you have all these frames and that other people maybe other people are seeing people through the lenses of everything that they're operating out of. Jesus was able to see them through a different one. And I think for us, I don't know, as we were talking about this, the questions that are coming to my mind are, what is empathy the antidote to? Like, why is it that empathy is an answer, and how is it going to nullify the effects of toxins in our soil? And I just think about the way that we often see people and from an outside. How easy is it it's just human nature to see people who are different from us as others, as someone who's against us, or that makes me uncomfortable. Like Jesus was present to people like lepers. At that time, that would have been very controversial.
Yeah.
Nobody even got anywhere near lepers.
Right.
And he didn't see them through the cultural frames that other people did. He was able to sort of counteract that, and empathy was the answer.
Yeah.
That I can see what they're going through. They're hurting and they're broken. The other frames that were there before, it sort of melts away these hard lines in our hard hearts, creates a softness, keeps us from prejudging people, and causes us to cross boundaries that would normally be there in order to be present.
I love that. I think you're right. I think that, empathy and compassion is sort of an anecdote to arrogance and judgment, right? Like quick to judge and others.
Antidote.
Yeah, what did I say?
Anecdote.
Oh, oops. And additionally, it might be self-absorption. Like when we can actually put ourselves in someone else's shoes, I think it's sort of corrects our self-absorbed way of living life, our narcissism, where the world revolves around me. It's just so interesting. I would challenge our listeners to read through the Gospels and just underline every time it mentions Jesus saw. I mean, over and over, the writers are drawing attention to the way Jesus saw people. He truly saw their dignity and humanity and the image of God that they represent. What's also interesting is of the 30 plus miracles in the Gospels accredited to Jesus, almost 1/4 of them involve the healing of sight. Right? So, Jesus heals a blind man in Matthew 9, another blind man at Bethsaida in Mark 8, a man who's born blind in John 9. I mean, we could keep going, but I wonder if the repetition of all these sight healings in some way indicate where we need healing too. Like we need God to heal our sight when it comes to the way we see other people. Like, right? Not to bring up, a sour subject, but perhaps we need like a vaccine of empathy and compassion to counteract our self-absorption, pride, judgmentalism, and narcissism.
I was going to say glasses, but you went there.
I did.
I need LASIK surgery on my eyes.
Yeah, we need LASIK surgery.
Yeah, it's almost like when you talk about Jesus saw the crowds and was filled with compassion, it's almost like the seeing part is the empathy. Like you can't engage compassionately unless you get the empathy part right, because then you're just going to be jumping to like fixing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff hitting my brain right now. I'm reflecting on how many times, I grew up in church, and we had missions partnerships, and we do currently now as well. We're actually going to get to hear from one soon on Sunday. There's something about people who have devoted so much of their life to be proximate to a certain group of people who are overlooked that it's invigorating the way they speak about it. Like people who are willing to give their entire lives, give up all the comforts. Why would they do that?
Yeah.
Right. And I understand, obviously, there's a call and God could call someone. But what does it look like to call someone and then produce this beautiful, empathetic relationship between people groups that wouldn't normally interact?
Yeah.
There's just something really inspiring about that, and also challenging for me.
For sure.
Because, me who would rather sit comfortable in the back of a Rolls Royce, as Adam pointed out. I will often overlook any opportunity I have to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm sorry. It's like,
this
I'm kind of processing at the moment.
This is why Mother Teresa captured the world's attention, because she was a person who inspired the world. And she would often say that, Calcuttas are everywhere. You don't have to travel to Calcutta to discover one. They're all around us. Again, if we have eyes to see. And, of course, it's not enough just to see. So Jesus just didn't just see it and then kind of keep moving the way I tend to be. Oh, I can see that, but I'm not going to actually pause, stop, or enter in. But that's exactly what Jesus did in the Gospels. We see it over and over again, that Jesus embodied empathy toward others in profound ways. He went beyond just seeing and noticing, which was already more than anybody else was doing around them. But he actually put his empathy into action by moving towards people with compassion. It was embodied compassion. And, Josiah, you mentioned many of those, the healing sick people. Sometimes he would stay up into the wee hours of the night because people just keep bringing their sick to him, and he would continue to provide healing. He healed disabled people, and often on the wrong day. you know, as if he was making the point that, hey, there is no law against compassion, you know, to use Skye Jitani's phrase. There's no law against compassion. God's compassion can be put on full display even on the Sabbath. The way he provided food for the poor and hungry. You know, when the disciples wanted to send them away, he multiplies bread. You know, Jesus repeatedly delivers those who are demonized. He sees them and has compassion on them and frees them from their enslavement.
Yeah, and just, sorry to interrupt, but that all those people you named were people that just think about that happening in our culture today. You had lepers, and you had disabled people, and you had demonized people. All those people would have been sort of scary.
Yeah.
And especially demonized people. Like some of the people he healed were on the outside of town.
Like chained to a tomb.
They chained them outside of the town so that they couldn't hurt anybody and nobody interacted with them at all. And they probably every reason to like, oh, I want to protect my kids. I want to protect this, whatever. The bottom line is like how big of a deal it is for Jesus to see someone like that through the lens of compassion.
That's
and
right.
How much of an antidote that is to our own self-absorption.
That's right. And as Katie mentioned, I think he's embodying and revealing the upside down nature of the kingdom of God in so doing, right? He's giving people a clear picture of here's what the kingdom of God looks like. We're turning the social stratification system of honor and shame upside down because it's distorting how we see and relate to each other. And so Jesus consistently sees people through a different lens, a different framework. He sees their humanity and dignity and then puts that on display by moving towards people with compassion, right?
And at a cost to himself.
Yes, costly ways. Yeah,
you
that's what I
know,
was gonna say.
I think sometimes it's easy because these stories are so familiar to many of us. It's easy to hear them and go, yeah, I know that story. I know that story. Like, yep, Jesus did that. But to really understand where Jesus would have been standing in a cultural moment and the cost to himself, his social standing, his reputation in religious communities, going to healing people on the Sabbath, like. Take women, for example, like in a world where women had almost no value, no rights, no standing in the world, we have countless stories of Jesus seeing them, dignifying them, and empowering them in ways that I think would have been shocking to those around him and did cost him something.
You guys, again, lots of things are hitting my brain like yours, Josiah. Okay, if Jesus embodies compassion towards those who are shamed, and in so doing, he bears insults and his reputation is tarnished. And we've named one of the toxins in the soil as like church growthism and having like all the success or whatever, right? Basically gaining honor in our culture. Like maybe a Tove community is one that embodies compassion, that bears the shame of those in our society and has a reputation that is tarnished because of it. Jesus intentionally... like the antidote, to circle back to that word, to the honor that everybody pursues in culture was to get proximate to those who had reputations of shame and to bear insults and persecution and slander, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be, maybe I'd go so far as to say, just trying out an idea here, that if we're truly going to embody the compassion of the kingdom, the compassion of Jesus, we will have to bear up some insults and some slander along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if the drive, I mean, it's just all the toxins we just have been naming the last several episodes. If the drive to do what we think we're supposed to do is only gaining social status, we might be on the wrong track.
Yeah. We might be trying to turn the upside down kingdom right side up in the wrong way.
And then to use it for our own gain, really.
Right. Well, okay. So we want to be anchoring our discussion in the life and the teachings of Jesus in light of some of the things we've noted about how we see what we see Jesus doing in the Gospels. How can we begin to nurture this in our own community? What would you guys say about that?
Well, Hudson, my 3-year-old, has a phrase. He says, "Put your lookers on."
Your lookers?
If he's looking for something, he says, "Put your lookers on." He goes like this. He learned it from
Oh, that's cute.
someone, not me. But so I would say put your lookers on and maybe start to notice what kind of a culture you have now, right? Like almost do an audit. If you want to grow in empathy, I think it's helpful to start by asking, are there certain areas where we are good at extending empathy currently? And are there areas where we could grow? So maybe asking questions like, are people in our community generally able to put themselves in other people's shoes? Like not assuming we know what people are going through, but actually putting ourselves in the place of trying to understand the life experiences, why people do what they do or think the way they think. Again, this goes back to like empathy before compassion, or seeing someone before we move towards them. We want to see things, I think, from the other person's perspective before we try to push solutions or fixes that seem right to us, but might not be helpful to them. Another thing to ask, if you're doing this audit, as I'm calling it, is are we able to meet people where they are rather than where we think they should be? And I think that churches can have a really hard time with this one. Like we can be open and welcoming to like all sorts of people as long as they don't threaten our way of doing things. Right? Like if you're struggling with like, say, addiction or whatever. Yeah. You're totally welcome here. Like, okay, we have a Celebrate Recovery in our church. Come, but as long as you like follow our formula of what we think you need to do to get your life on track. Like we can celebrate your story of healing and, okay, but what about people in our churches who don't do the things we want them to do? What about the people who come to Celebrate Recovery and relapse? Like how do we come alongside those people and extend empathy towards them if they aren't like fitting the model of what we want them to do? Does that make sense? Is that making sense?
Yeah, it's almost like empathy and compassion need to be the point and not changing people be the point.
Yes.
Right? So if the point that I'm doing is because like someone's got to change, well, of course, we want that to be the ultimate result is transformation in people's lives and our own and in our community. But the point of what we're doing is just to say, I'm going to practice and embody empathy just because that's what Jesus did. And I'm going to let go of maybe some of the results that I think have to happen when I do that.
Yeah. Well, and to Mac's point, we can have empathy. It's easy to have empathy towards people who continue to help feed the narrative or the image that you want to project in your church, right? Look at all these people coming to be healed in our Celebrate Recovery group. What about the people who work against that reputation? I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at here.
Yeah. Last night at dinner, we kind of did our highs and lows, and my one of my boys, his low was one of his teachers. Can't stand this one teacher, and he said, "I do not respect her." And I said, "Interesting." And he went on all the reasons why he doesn't respect her. And I said, "Hey, can I share with you something I've learned about respect?" And he's like, "Fine, but I'm still not going to respect her." And I said, "Okay. Do you really want to hear? If not, that's okay. Like, I'm not going to impose it on you." He's like, "Sure, just tell me." I'm like, "Well, I've learned over the years that respect has less to do with the other person and more to do with who I am as a person. There's many people who don't behave in a way that's like worthy of respect. But choosing to be respectful is about like the character I've tried to cultivate as a human being." And I think it's this kind of getting at what you were saying, Josiah. Like if compassion is just a means to the end that I want for this other person, rather than like something that is actually a reflection of who I am, no matter how they're behaving, then it actually becomes just a tool of manipulation and lacks authenticity. Like our compassion is actually an extension of our own manipulation to produce an outcome in someone else's life.
Yeah.
To your point about someone maybe who's on a journey of recovery from an addiction, Jesus is no less present to that person who takes decades to maybe see change in their lives. So if we are to embody empathy and be like Jesus, should be embodying people who are going to walk alongside them no matter what, that we're going to be there for them, whether there's change or not. And again, to your point, that's going to mean that our church may be full of people who aren't fixed,
Yeah.
who aren't all perfect.
Right.
And I would hope that as a community, and no matter what church you're a part of, that we would wear that just like as a badge of honor, that we're a place that anybody wants to be able to anybody who's struggling can feel at home.
Thank goodness God is so patient with those people.
Yeah. Okay, wait, before you move on, one more, I just have one more thought I want to add to this one. And that's the question of, do we give people like the benefit of the doubt, and do we get curious about who they are, or do like assumptions and prejudgments get in the way? So when people walk in our church building, all of us as human beings, I think, have a tendency to kind of make a judgment or try to put people in a box. Like, oh, this person seems like this other group of people I know, so they must kind of be like this. And I think they're, whatever. We're all going to do that to some extent. But I do think it's important to like really get curious about who people are, allow them to define themselves, and that's just a way of like dignifying people and being able to extend empathy towards them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think all this is great, Katie. I think you're casting really solid vision for just how to create a community that has nurtured empathy and compassion, and asking some good questions about how do we see people relating to each other. Another maybe step that a church could take to nurture empathy and compassion would be to identify those who are overlooked or marginalized in your church community. And my hunch is that if you really look carefully at your church, and even our church, you might notice some people that tend to be overlooked, even if it's unintentional. And we even see this in the scriptures. I mean, in Acts chapter 6, there's this big kerfuffle because the Greek widows were being overlooked in the distribution of food, as the Jewish widows were being given special treatment. So it's happening in the early church. And what's important is how the early church responded. They appointed leaders to ensure that no one was overlooked or marginalized moving forward. So that's what I have in mind here. We need to be able to identify those people groups that may potentially be overlooked, with the goal of correcting that so everybody's treated with dignity and value. So a couple groups that came to my mind when I even think about our own church over the years that I just noticed. One would be the elderly. I think that we live in a culture where people's value and worth is largely determined by what they can do and how much they can accomplish and achieve. And so as people get more advanced in life and they're not able to achieve and accomplish and do as much, we tend to view them as less able to contribute. And then it's really easy to just kind of overlook them or push them off to the side. And I just think that's such a shame. And I'll just confess, the longer I've been in pastoral ministry, the more I'll say the elderly is like one of my favorite groups to be close to. And part of it is because they've remained faithful over a long period of time. So this is like a very faithful group of people. And they have lots of life experiences, more than mine, that I can learn from. They're also very funny. I experienced they just have there's so much laughter and humor when I'm hanging out with them.
Okay, can I make a joke?
Sure. As long as it's I'm kind of nervous now.
We could always edit it out. One, you said that our culture, ascribes worth based on how much you can do, and the elderly are an exception. One caveat would be if you want to be the president of the United States.
Oh boy!
I mean,
yeah, we do have.
That's a rip on both sides.
Yeah,
okay,
I see it.
We have very elderly people running for president.
Yeah. I agree with you. Along that same sort of line of thinking, that we tend to value people who, based on how much they can do and sort of contribute, I think those with disabilities can often be overlooked in a church community. I obviously have a son with Down syndrome, so this hits close to home. We actually have lots of individuals with Down syndrome in our community, several young kids. But disability goes beyond that. The neurodivergent, or those who are maybe suffering with an illness over an extended time, the physically disabled. And again, in a culture where we totally evaluate everybody based on how much they can do for us, it's easy to kind of kick these people to the side. Or, and I'll just say this, treat them as like sort of a charity case, rather than people who actually have gifts, spiritual gifts and talents to edify and build up our body just as much as I do, right? So there's a reframe there. And then the final group I thought of is just women. I think it's really easy for women to be overlooked within the life of a church. Katie, you traveled with us to our district conference just a few weeks ago. I remember 2 years ago when you went to our district conference, how many people did you have come up and go, hey, are you the director of women's ministry? Are you the children's? Whose wife are you? Whose wife are you? Like, not even able to consider pastor. Maybe you're like, the executive director on our church staff. You know what I mean? Like, it just felt, in fact, a couple weeks ago, we were at the CMA conference and a man pointed to the coffee and said, "Ooh, this is empty," as if you should be the one to fill it. And when you told me that, both of you had to like hold me down. I was ready to freak out.
I was like, oh, that was a mistake to tell that.
Yeah. I mean, that made me so upset. But it goes to my point. I think women can often be treated as second-class citizens in a church community. And I mean, again, to our shame, the early church largely grew and multiplied and turned the Roman Empire upside down because of women, slaves, and children. So,
Yeah. Yeah, one quote I really like from the church called Tove book says, "Churches that follow Jesus don't simply take up a cause for one specific group. They develop a culture in which they hear the cries of all the distressed, all the wounded, and respond with compassion. Tove churches will develop an empathy radar with an instinctive bias towards acts of grace, peace, mercy, and goodness for everyone." And I think that's so good.
An empathy radar.
An empathy radar.
I like that.
Yeah. I think one of the
compassion binoculars.
I was hoping it started with a C.
Oh yeah.
I was hoping compassion vaccine.
Yeah.
Oh man. No, I was just going to say, I think one of the other reasons why people tend to avoid pressing into these things is just out of discomfort. And people want their boxes. I mean, again, I kind of alluded, I'm definitely showing my cards, but that's generally why sometimes I won't engage is maybe like a lack of understanding of what I'm supposed to say or do, and you get anxious, and then you kind of just like end up avoiding it, and obviously that's not helpful. But I think that's important to point out that if you're someone maybe who's having a hard time, like I do want to try to break some of those barriers, I want to try to put on the empathy glasses. Like it will involve just like it's
getting
not
outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, and it's not malicious to say, like, it's not all malicious intent because you're having a hard time. Just be like, just give yourself a break and say, I'm a little uncomfortable. It's going to require me stepping out of my comfort zone, and I'm going to try to put on the glasses and have Jesus help.
If you're going to help the person on the street corner, you're going to have to stop the Rolls Royce and at least roll down the window.
Throw some cash out the side. Yeah. So Mick, you alluded to this earlier, but one of the things we'll need to do is that once we have identified some of these areas, we need to create structures that will embody the empathy. So
I had in mind like Acts 6. I mean, they actually did something. They actually appointed Greek leaders to oversee the distribution of food to correct the favoritism that was creeping in there.
Yeah. Identifying those who are not being honored and then seeking to change that will eventually involve creating structures to support it. I think of, I'm just going to name a few instances within our church, our own church community, having a food pantry. Often in our area, it's an affluent area, so I feel like people who are struggling to make ends meet can get overlooked very easily. We've developed like some care partners to help people through tough times, people who want to walk alongside others in a very committed fashion. Partnership with the school district to try to help. I really like that. We do this snack drive in the fall every year, and the idea is that kids go to school with snacks all the time, but families who are struggling to make ends meet will often kids will go without snacks, and the issue isn't necessarily that they're going to go hungry, which is part of it, but part of it is this sense of dignity that all the other kids are having snacks and they don't. And for a child that doesn't always understand that, they can react in multiple ways. And the teachers have found such an incredible thing that happens as simple as the child who didn't have a snack is able to engage with their peers in a way that, they have a snack too. Yeah. And then they don't feel like they're less than because they make less money than the other family. So some of these things are ways that we can engage and create structures around. But the other one for us as a church staff that sort of became of some of this work of wanting to do this here was essentially appointing, like within our staff meetings we have every week, we have a structure around care. And we have Deb who sort of oversees that. and we'll have ways in which we can engage within our community and people maybe who are on our prayer list. And then we have a check-in every single week that says, hey, what's going on? Who are the people we need to be caring for? And then talking about it as a staff and being able to engage and have next steps. That continual check-in is a structure that we're like committing to make sure that we see the things that might normally fall through the cracks.
Yep. That's great, man. So maybe let's, shift towards we try to end with some practices. So let's give some imagination for our individual listeners how to practice some of this work of embodying compassion and nurturing empathy.
How to praxis it?
Yep.
Praxis, if you will.
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about seeing on this episode. And so I would draw on that to say we can't address what we can't see. And we all have things we can't see. So just recognizing that we all grew up with specific experiences that kind of frame our perspective. It's just good to be aware of that. And then I'll ask God to help you see what you don't see on your own, to heal our sight, if you will. It's okay to admit that you don't know what you don't know. So let's ask God to help kind of expand our understanding and help us see who might be in our circles that are in need of empathy.
Yeah. I think this was before you joined our staff team, Katie, but we went through a book where there was a lot of emphasis on how we're seeing people and the world around us. And for a while, I think you did this. You put like, God, heal my sight on your phone screen. So every time you had to unlock it, you kind of saw that, God, we can't see what we can't see.
Yeah.
And I did the same. I followed your lead, Josiah, and for a long time, every time I opened my phone, there it was, God, please heal my sight. Help me to see the way you see. A second practice would get to get proximate to people who are hurting. Josiah, you named, like, this is going to be uncomfortable. It is. You're going to have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. But this is what embodying compassion involves. It means actually getting proximate to people who are hurting or in a difficult place. And, I was reminded of just like how much of a difference this can make. On our spring break trip, we had a connecting flight in Detroit to San Diego. And we had just a little bit of time to like make the connection. And when we got there, all of us were in different seats, spread over all over the plane. And Griffin, our youngest son, has Down syndrome. He cannot sit alone unless he wants to like make everybody miserable. And so they were kind of like, hey, no big deal. Someone will for sure switch with you. Let us know if you have a problem. So Josie sits next to Griffin on the plane. And when the first person came up, it was kind of this big, kind of gruff guy. He had an accent, and Josie said, hey, here's the problem. Our son has Down syndrome, and he needs someone to sit next to him. So would you be willing to switch seats with me? And he looked at Griffin, our son, and the moment he saw his disability, like his face changed, and he sneered at him and said, no way. Would not give up his seat. And the woman standing by me, I'm just like a couple rows away watching this, and I'm boiling with anger. My instinct was not to bless him. I'll just say that. I'm still growing in cruciformity. This woman sitting near me said, I have a son with Down syndrome. I'll trade seats. Now, you don't have to have a son with a disability to give up your seat for someone on a plane who needs to sit next to their child. But the fact that this woman was proximate, she knew what this is like. Like, she was so much quicker. Like, immediately, there was no hesitation. So when I say, get proximate to people who are hurting, that's what I have in mind. You don't have to be in that person's shoes. You don't have to have a child with a disability to understand what they might be experiencing. But the more you enter in, the more you become proximate to those people, the easier it is to embody compassion.
Yeah, it wasn't difficult for her to embody that.
No.
Because she was so present to the...
No, and I can tell you, like, some of our best friends who do life with us and watch us, for instance, care for Griffin and have gotten close to Griffin, their perspective has changed. They're able to enter in a way maybe they hadn't before, simply because Griffin isn't just an object. He's someone that they love and know.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, a third one would just be to act on it, to participate in a ministry maybe within your own community. Maybe your church has some of these things that we named before, like a food pantry, the care partner type of thing, ways that you can engage, or maybe find something nearby, right? There's lots of local outreaches and things where you could go and be present to people. I think of assisted living and nursing homes often get unvisited, and how much it can make someone's day and really their entire life by having someone be close and present. I'm challenged in that myself, honestly.
Pull over the Rolls Royce. Yeah. I need to stop and visit an elderly person and make myself feel good.
To be very clear, I do not own a Rolls Royce, and I still drive.
You do have a nice Pathfinder.
Yeah. But yeah, so, and if you're listening from our church community, there are ways that you could get involved as well. Volunteering in our food pantry, becoming a care partner. I know our deacon team has lots of opportunities to engage in care as well.
Yeah. And this is so timely because, just thinking about, so I work with the deacons, and they oversee what's called our benevolence fund, where they help people either in or outside of our church community who need some sort of assistance. Financial assistance typically, and then an outgrowth of that was a care ministry where they're doing meal trains and yard work and housework for people. And this is something they're struggling with right now. Like, they're having the conversation when we help people and then they continue to make the same decisions and they don't seem to be doing things the way that we would want them to do it. Like, what does it look like to continue to extend empathy, even when we have sometimes like the same people coming back in the same situation? And it can be hard. Yeah. It can be frustrating.
It's hard to distinguish, not to add a whole nother conversation of this conversation, but sometimes it can be hard to distinguish between toxic charity on the one hand and my own compassion fatigue on the other.
Totally.
Right? And I think there's some discernment work that needs to happen there.
Yeah.
For all of us,
And it all, I would go back to like, it all starts with empathy. Jesus didn't just sort of like go, oh, okay, well, you're doing this, and then have like a formulaic response. He knew where people were coming from, and then he responded to them kind of based on their situation. Well, good stuff, guys. We covered a lot of ground today. This was our first episode in the series where we began to name what key nutrients we want to put in the soil in order to have a healthy church, or a Tov church. And today we focused on empathy. So we looked at Tov churches, those who seek goodness and wholeness in everything they do, will do the hard work of building a culture of empathy and compassion. They'll ask God to give them eyes to see people the way that he sees them, and they'll work to emulate the ways that Jesus saw people, dignified people, and loved people in their everyday lives.
Yep, so that's it for today. Next time, we're going to discuss another nutrient we can put into the soil to create a healthy church culture. We're going to talk about grace. So I'm excited for it. Hope you guys will tune in.
Praxis is recorded and produced at Crosspoint Community Church. You can find out more about the show and our church at crosspointwi.com. If you have questions, comments, or have any suggestions for future topics, feel free to send us an email. Also, if you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.